Where does the day go?
Good evening, everyone. We're about to start this special study session. I don't know if it's special or not, but it's a study session of April the 5th, 2022. Before we do, I'm going to stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Anyone who would like to join me, please feel free to do so. Join me in the pledge. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, I don't have an agenda in front of me, but I've got a PowerPoint in front of me, so I'm going to assume that that's where we're going. Mr. Langford, I believe that's you.
I think so, Mr. Brewer.
All right, Mr. Wise, I was thinking as we said the pledge tonight, I think Sumner County School Board is the only body that says the pledge correctly, that there's no comma before the under guy.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
It took some time to teach it though.
That's right, that's right.
They don't do it right in Mississippi, let me tell you.
10 years, that's all. 11 years on.
All right, well, you should have on your, in front of you, there's a binder, 3-ring binder with the actual application, okay? And I'll go through each part of it as we go through the presentation. That's the application from Founders Classical Academy of Hendersonville. That's what they submitted to us to apply for a charter school. Okay, the stapled handout that's about 38 pages that you have is the Tennessee Charter School Application Scoring Criteria. It's a rubric that we had to follow in our analysis. So we'll go through all that. We won't go through all of it tonight. Don't worry, Ms. Brown. We're going to hit the high points tonight, but you have that if you want to look over and read. But what we'll do first is I'll go through the presentation, go through the entire process, and then any questions that y'all have. But probably the best thing to do is just to jump in and get started. And then, of course, obviously if you have questions as we go, feel free to jump in and ask. Well, I may need to. Did Chris step out? Oh, there it goes. Okay. Got about 3 at once. All right, so the charter school authorization process. This is the first time we've had a charter application in Sumner County. So there are a lot of steps to this in terms of what's in Tennessee Code Annotated, what's in the Tennessee state policies. And so we'll run through those real quickly, define what a charter school is, the purpose of a charter school, and then the laws and policies that govern it. And then we are the authorizer. So what are the qualities of what are the characteristics of a quality authorizer? Okay, so what is a charter school? They are public schools operated by independent nonprofit governing bodies. In Tennessee, public charter school students are measured against the same academic standards as students in other public schools. Local boards ensure that those charter schools that meet the needs of their students shall open and remain open throughout their 10-year charter term. And local boards, and this is the important part for us, local boards do this through a rigorous authorization process, ongoing monitoring of the academic, operational, and financial performance, and when necessary through the revocation or non-renewal of charters. So I'll give you just a moment. Here is the purpose of charter schools. So as we go through the application process, one of the things we have to look at is, do they fulfill the purpose and do they align with what's the standard in Sumner County? So improve learning for all students and close achievement gaps. Provide options for parents to meet educational needs of students. Encourage the use of different and innovative teaching methods and provide greater decision-making authority to schools and teachers in exchange for greater responsibility for student performance. Then you see measure performance of pupils and faculty and ensure that children have the opportunity to reach proficiency on state academic assessments. Create new professional opportunities for teachers and afford parents substantial, meaningful opportunities to participate in the education of their children. And then the law, it's there. We can share this PowerPoint presentation with you if you want to read over the law. And the specific Tennessee Code Annotated is referenced in the bottom, at the bottom. And again, there are certain things like you can't have a cyber charter school. It has to be a brick and mortar approach to education. And then here is so state board policy is really what we'll be digging into more. And these were adopted in 2018 to align charter school practices to national best practices and to detail the essential practices that govern the operation of charter school authorizers in Tennessee. So a quality authorizer, that's us, maintains high standards for its charter schools in exchange for autonomy while ensuring student and public interest are protected. Authorizers are evaluated biennially on the standards by the state board, and quality authorizing begins with a charter application. So this is where we are tonight, and this is from state board policy. A quality authorizer, local school boards, grant charters to applicants that have demonstrated competence and capacity to succeed in all aspects of their model consistent with the state's scoring rubric criteria. That's this packet. Approves applications that are comprised of a detailed plan for charter school opening, operation, and fiscal stability with little substantive work left for later development. Informs applicants of their rights and responsibilities and promptly notifies applicants of approval or denial while explaining the factors that determine the decision so that applicants can decide if they wish to revise their plans based in part on that information and resubmit in the future. This slide's probably the most important for what we have to do. It outlines like the standards that we're supposed to apply in reviewing the application. Okay, so just the steps. This is an overview. This is very procedural. All right, there are a lot of steps to this process that we've gone through. So I want to walk you through, so especially since it's our first time, so you can see what the process is and who all's worked on it. Okay, so here's our charter school authorizer committee. Dr. Phillips, Mr. Paul Decker. As a community official, Mr. Decker is a former Sumner County Commissioner, retired principal from Westington Place Elementary and Hendersonville High School, also a former principal at Davidson Academy. So he brought to the table experience as a county elected official, but also as a public and private school principal. Dr. Charles Lee, a community member, and Dr. Charles Lee has had his hand on higher education for the last 40 years and also serves in many other capacities and many boards in Sumner County. And Amy Ramsey lives in Hendersonville. She's a Sumner County business person, leads a lot of charity events and nonprofit work in Hendersonville and across the county, and also is a parent of a Sumner County student. Amanda Brown, our Chief Financial Officer. Norma Dam, our Chief Student Support Officer. Myself. Andy Brown, Assistant Director for Facilities and Support Services. Chris Brown, IT. Katie Brown, Student Support. We've got 3 more Browns in here at some point, y'all. Lisa Herron, Assistant Director for Health Services. Jeremy Johnson, Assistant Director for Communications and Board Relations. Craig Ott, Human Resources. We've got the legendary Brad Schreiner with us tonight. She joined us, really appreciative to have Brad on here because the application is a classical academy. And so Brad jumped in to help us, being the founding principal of Merrill Hyde Magnet School and Sumner County Middle College High School. So she brings a lot of experience in the way you start schools, the way you kick them off, and you found them strongly. And really very insightful in every step of our process. I'm very appreciative for Brad for helping us. Dr. Jeff Young, our Supervisor of Professional Growth. And then Rhonda Jernigan, who works in Amanda's office. She's the Supervisor of Accounting and Reporting. A lot of the financials are really important in this process. So that's our team. It's a large team that I'm really proud of. They did an exceptional job of going through these steps and very, very thorough review of every step of the process. Okay, so here's the process timeline. December 3rd, we received a letter of interest from Delray Education. That's the sponsor of Founders Classical Academy in Hendersonville. Okay, they submitted their application on January 26th. We started our review process on March 7th. So we've had 4 meetings: March 7th, 21st, 28th, April 4th, to prepare for the presentation tonight. And then in 2 weeks, y'all will determine whether we accept, approve, or reject the charter application. Okay, so here's just an overall how the process works from start to finish for any charter school in Tennessee. So this year they had to file the letter of intent by December 3rd, indicating that they were going to apply. They had to turn in that application, that's your 3-ring binder, they had to turn it in by February 1st. Ours turned it in on January 26th. So if you go up to the next dot, that started our 90 days. So within 90 days of receiving the application, we have to vote on an initial application. Okay? So if we accept the charter, then we have a charter school. Okay? We start a different process on how we start the charter school. If we reject the charter, it goes back to the applicant and they have 30 days to submit an amended application. When we receive that amended application, we'll go through a process very similar to the one that we went through this time, okay, to see if the revisions now meet our expectations for what a quality charter school in Sumner County would be. All right, so then within 60 days of receiving that application, the school board has to vote again, okay, whether to accept or reject. All right, again, if we accept it, then we have a charter school. If we reject it, the sponsor has the opportunity to appeal it to the State Charter Commission. Okay, they have 10 days from that second denial to appeal to the state, and then the state would basically replicate the same process, and they would have a hearing somewhere, usually December, January, and they would make a vote to determine whether or not to override the local education agency. So that's kind of the big picture, 30,000 foot view of the process. Okay, so the rubric, if you pour through these pages as you look through them, there are 3 sections that we are required to assess. And remember, we're going back to look like, does it meet the standards of a quality authorized charter school? Is it pretty close to ready to roll? And does it meet all the requirements so students can have the same great educational experience that we expect in every Sumner County school? So we look at academics, we look at operations, and we look at financials. All right, this is, if you flip through the pages, the rubric has a couple of parts. If you look, like I'm on page 5, that's school mission and vision. It gives you characteristics of a strong response, and you can see our work there. So basically, we do an initial application review, okay? Our subcommittees that we'll talk through in just a minute, our subcommittees went through each of the sections, academics, operations, and finances, and they filled out this initial application review. And they decided as a group whether it met or exceeded, partially met, or did not meet, okay? We came back together and looked at all of those initial determinations, okay? And so we give 1 of 3 scores on the rubric: meets or exceeds the standard, partially meets, or does not meet the standard. All right, so here's how this process worked. If you want to leave it on page 5, it may be helpful to come back and refer to that. So the committee met on March 7th from 1:30 to 3:30, and we received initial training on charter schools and quality authorizing. We did about a 45-minute to an hour presentation on all the steps of the law and what it looks like to review a charter school application. Okay, I gave you all a kind of I didn't figure you wanted the full discussion of Tennessee Code annotated, and happy to do that if anybody wants it. I'll do it off channel. So we did that training, and then everybody that's on the committee signed a conflict of interest form to indicate that they have no connection to Founders, Del Rey, Responsive Ed, or anybody else affiliated with the charter school. All right, so we received subcommittee assignments and we began the initial review process. We concluded the initial review process on March 21st from 1:30 to 3:30, and then we drafted capacity interview questions. The second part is, after you complete the initial review, we did a 90-minute interview with Founders Classical Academy to ask the questions that came out as concerns or interests based on our initial review of their application. Let me hold off on that and tell you who our committees were. Our academic plan subcommittee was Norma Dam, Paul Decker, me, Lisa Herron, Amy Ramsey, and Brad Schreiner. Okay. Our operations subcommittee, Andy Brown, Chris Brown, Jeremy Johnson, Dr. Lee, Craig Ott, and Dr. Young. And our financial plan, Amanda Brown, Katie Brown, Rhonda Jernigan, Dale Phillips, and I put Rhonda's name on there twice because she was really important to the work of the committee. She did. But y'all, I mean, I got to say again, I just want to brag for a second. We had top-notch people to look at this plan. I mean, really the best in the business. So the capacity interview, we met from noon to 1:30. We went back through our initial rubric scoring. We raised every concern that we could think of. We finalized our capacity interview questions. And then from 1:30 to 4, we conducted a 90-minute interview via Zoom. We found out on the Friday before that we were going to be doing it on Zoom instead of meeting face-to-face. And we had 3 of the people. Brian Haas, who's the founding board chair of Delray Education. He was with us. Mike Terry and Dr. Terrence Moore that work for Responsive Ed were also with us. And I would say, we had probably about 30 or 40 questions. And then with follow-up questions, we had a pretty thorough 95 minute interview with them about questions and concerns that came up in our initial review of the application.
Scott,
Yes, sir.
do you think the Zoom platform hindered the process in any way?
I don't. Because realistically, it's not like we were trying to walk through classrooms or see something like that. We were talking to their 3 representatives, and so we asked questions and they responded. So. Mhm. All right, so then we met yesterday from 1:30 to 4, and we reviewed the initial rubric scoring and capacity interview. And let me add, we used Google Docs a lot, so the groups worked off channel. There were a lot of comments and thoughts put out there. So there was more time committed than just the meeting times. These were formal meeting times when we worked together as a group or in our subcommittee teams. So we reviewed the initial rubric scoring and the capacity interview. We finalized our assigned categories, academics, operations, and financial, in our subcommittees. Then we came back and evaluated each category section by section, the whole committee. So we went through 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, all the way through 3.1, 3.2. So we went through together every word that was on there, and then we decided, what we changed, what we kept, and then we determined a final recommendation for the school board. So that was the process. Okay, so what is our committee recommendation? All right, so section 1, academic plan, design, and capacity. So if you look on here, you'll see, so we did the initial application review, then we did the interview, and then we came back yesterday and did the final application review. All right, and then when we got to the end, we had to decide section by section whether it met our criteria, whether it partially met, or whether it did not meet. Now remember, our challenge was is this a school that's pretty close to ready to open and meet the needs of Sumner County schools in August 2024? So it's not just a straight tally of how many partially mets, did not meet, met or exceeded. It's, can this school open, function, and thrive like we expect all of our schools? So here is the committee's recommendation. Founders Classical Academy of Hendersonville did not sufficiently study the Hendersonville area to understand current demographics or offerings. Merrill Hyde Magnet School was structured from its beginning as a classical school. Okay, Hendersonville High School has extensive fine arts offering and is adding an audiovisual production CTE career pathway. In the interview, they made reference to the fact that their theme would be on audiovisual production. All right, we've already started conversations, Chase's team has, with Music City Studios to create partnership arrangements between, starting with Hendersonville, but later with most of our schools, to do internships and externships and work-based learning with Music City Studios when it opens, probably February or March of 2023. But we will start the program, the CTE program, in Hendersonville in audiovisual production in August. Indian Lake Elementary, Jack Anderson Elementary, and Burris Elementary in the Hendersonville area are STEM or STEAM accredited schools. Okay? Founders Classical Academy of Hendersonville is not prepared to support special population students. Projected enrollment for students with disabilities, EL students, and economically disadvantaged students is significantly below the actual Hendersonville and Sumner County population. They estimated, was it 4%?
They were projecting 2% for students with disabilities and 1% for EL students and
11%, I think,
11%
for, yeah.
for economically disadvantaged. And when I looked at all the schools in Sumner County, I took each school, that doesn't match any of the schools.
Yeah. So they're significantly, we're normally between 12 to 15% in special ed, about 4% growing rapidly in English language learners, and in the 20s on economically disadvantaged. So the projections are significantly skewed lower than what we see in our actual schools in Sumner County. Projected budgets do not provide adequate funding for teachers and support staff for special population students. And the application lacks a comprehensive and detailed plan of support for special population students. They mentioned a lot about phonics, which we agree phonics is important. It's why we went a couple years ago to foundational literacy. Phonics is a part of foundational literacy, right? Like I'll admit I'm a literacy nerd, but I'm not going to explain it all. But phonics is a huge part, but it's not the only part of foundational literacy. There are a lot of other things that kids need as they're learning to read. So while we agree that phonics is important, it's not the only thing that meets the needs of students with disabilities. And you know, the work on students that are English language learners was more contrived than that. There really wasn't much of a plan to help English language learners. Okay. So Founders Classical Academy of Hendersonville does not provide sufficient CTE and post-secondary options for students. One career pathway for CTE students, audiovisual production, compared to 30 currently in Sumner County. No planned dual enrollment offerings. Merrill Hyde and Hendersonville together offer about 40 AP classes and post-secondary offerings. Plans to meet CTE needs for students. Through the interview, we were told that to go beyond the one CTE pathway that they anticipate, they would try to address the needs of students through summer internships, after school clubs, and parental help of parents that had a career that students were interested in. No plan to provide intervention support for students struggling to meet graduation requirements. As a result of that, I'll show you in just a minute. Let me go ahead and jump. This was our overall scores on the rubric for section 1. So we had partially met in 1.1, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. Some of these they don't apply because as a New Start charter, they don't have experience. So not all the components of this application apply to them. So 1.5 does not apply to them, but the others, 1.6, 1.2, and then 1.6 through 1.12, they did not meet the standard. And that led the committee to recommend to the school board that the application in terms of academic plan, design, and capacity does not meet the standard. Okay, section 2, operations plan, design, and capacity. And y'all, we had a great team on each of the three, but if you look at who, you know, like Andy and Chris, what they do with maintenance, and then you add in Craig Ott, who's run HR and Metro and a lot of other large districts around the country. You know, we had a team that really understood, and Dr. Lee, able to really dig in and explore, you know, how prepared they were in operations design, plan and design. So Founders Classical Academy of Hendersonville does not have a viable plan to operate a school by August 2024. They currently lack a physical location or any agreement to occupy the 85,000 square foot facility that they identify as a need in their plan. Okay? They lack a plan for playgrounds, gym, outside recreational facilities, or a plan on classroom usage once they acquire a space. Market research in the Hendersonville area does not support the school's ability to build or renovate a space suitable to open a school in August of 2024. If you've ever tried to go through codes and planning and everything else, that's not a 1 month process. That's 6 months to a year probably, and that's after you identify the space, and that's before you make the first bid of building or renovation. Founders Classical Academy of Hendersonville lacks a sufficient technology plan to provide students and faculty with devices or to meet the security needs of the campus. They have a security plan. What we have no evidence of is the money to purchase the technology or the devices to make said plan effective. Founders Classical Academy of Hendersonville does not have a plan to recruit and retain teachers in the highly competitive environment in the Hendersonville and Sumner County area, especially in hard to staff areas like special ed, EL teachers, and math and science. Okay, and so this is, again, the committee recommended not to approve. This was the overall rubric scores for each of the areas. Their insurance met the standard. Transportation met the standard. They don't have a transportation plan, but Tennessee law does not require school systems to provide transportation. It's something that we do because it's necessary to serve our kids, but not something that's required. So they meet the standard, not in the sense that they're providing transportation, but because it's not a requirement by law. And waivers, they met the standard, they didn't apply for any waivers. Okay? And then financial plan and capacity. Founders Classical Academy did not budget to meet Tennessee BEP staffing requirements. Founders Classical Academy did not prepare a complete or accurate budget that shows the ability to open and operate a school in Sumner County on their proposed timeline. The budget does not include sufficient funding for adequate nursing staff, a school counselor, additional leadership staff, or special education teachers and staff. The budget does not include sufficient funding for furniture, technology, or security equipment, and the budget does not include sufficient funding for employee health benefits and taxes. As a result of that, the committee recommended that Founders Classical Academy of Hendersonville does not meet the standards with regards to the financial plan and capacity. And then you can see there on the rubric, when you look at that page, 3.1 and 3.2 are lumped together, and so they did not meet the standard there. And those budget documents are in that document in 3.1, 3.2, but there's also an appendix with what we received for budgetary documents. All right, so the committee unanimously recommends to reject the charter application for Founders Classical Academy of Hendersonville. So to go back to the process, our job is to make a recommendation to the school board and then for you to deliberate and make a vote on whether to accept or reject the charter. So the committee unanimously recommends to reject the charter, okay? But that's not tonight, that's in 2 weeks when we vote. So tonight it's to share this information with you, and then if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer those.
Scott, I do have a question. It's specific to.
I'm going to let Mr. Brewer as chairman.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Mr.
Apologize, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Duncan. I'm kind of a stickler on that, Mr. Duncan.
No problem. I'm kind of that way myself, and I do apologize, Mr. Chairman, for jumping the gun. I just curiosity got the best of me. Section 2
Yes, sir.
about the plan for the 85,000 square foot facility. I'm sure I'll get an opportunity to read all this document and learn about that. Were they just proposing a concept and not a physical location? Did I understand that to be the case?
I'm going to let Dr. Phillips answer that one.
So they had a square footage, and in the interview, I think they mentioned kind of how they typically calculate that per student, which is typical in the architecture world.
Understood.
So they identified, really didn't identify a location specifically. They said that they had, I think, some initial talks with Music City Studios, but that nothing concrete yet. But other than that, you'll see in this big document, in that section, where it kind of references anywhere from Hendersonville to Gallatin, yet they applied as Founders Classical Academy of Hendersonville. So that's kind of how non-specific it was about the location, and why we had concerns that, finding 85,000, 90, 95, 100,000 square feet of space somewhere in Hendersonville or between Hendersonville and Gallatin, and then doing all the necessary things to go through building and codes and everything that's necessary, renovating the space, getting an occupancy compliance certificate, and then actually starting school. That's a long journey, especially to not have that kind of space secured yet.
That's why I asked that specific question, because that's the major concern that jumps out of my head is we're going to put Sumner County students in a facility that we have no idea what that facility is. They have a security plan, but I don't know how that security plan is going to actually work at the facility that doesn't exist. Again, I start peeling, it's the engineering mind, the logic starts to peel back the onion, and I get really confused real quick, because I need to have a concept or a white box to start with, and an 85,000 square foot white box in that particular commercial corridor is going to be very hard to find.
Yeah.
So I understand where you're at. I just wanted to get clarification.
Yeah, and I think, Mr. Duncan, as Dr. Phillips mentioned, the reason it raised as a concern for the interview for us to ask the question was it referenced Durham Farms, but it also referenced Gallatin. So we asked a clarifying question. I mentioned they referenced Music City Studios, as Dr. Phillips mentioned, so it's just not real spelled out.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
I remember when Dr. Phillips read us a thing from the state that bothered me at the time, and I want to know if it's been changed. They had in there, like if a kid goes to a charter school, they could come back anytime within the year. Does that still stand?
Well, the way that it's written in public charter school law, I believe, they're still viewed obviously as public school students. So they're still Sumner County students, right?
Right.
They're just at a charter school that's being operated by a group other than us from a management perspective. So really how you would look at it would be Delray has a board. They are the ones making the application, but they are going to outsource all of the management of the school. Managing teachers, you'll see this in this document, okay? It's called a CMO. They're going to outsource all of those functions to Responsive Ed. Responsive Ed runs charter schools in several states. They are based out of Texas. And all of that's in your big binder that you'll read, and you can read about them. So that's kind of how that process works. At the end of the day, they are still Sumner County students. So this process in your mind, you need to think of it like, how would we view opening a new school? And do we think that the information that they're providing makes us feel good, just as we would use that same standard opening a new school in Hendersonville or White House or Liberty Creek? How do we view their application through that lens? Does that make sense? And so, as you heard from Mr. Langford, and as you read over the next 2 weeks this application, I think with your experience as a board member, you'll start to see where all of those things that we've brought forward as the main concerns, not all of the concerns, but the main concerns, certainly I think will put up red flags probably like it did for us, that they probably, obviously in all of those sections, in totality, don't meet the standard that we would have for Sumner County students to attend a school, public school.
I still want to know, can they go back?
Yes.
I am wholeheartedly against that. For one thing, the money goes. It's not a Sumner County school in the fact that they take their money with them and then they come back with what, I'm sure they do it per day or whatever. But I do not fear charter schools. To me, Sumner County schools have no reason to. These kids are not necessarily going to flock to this school, so I don't even think about it. I think you get more of your disgruntled than flock than your ones you want to keep. But I just don't think anybody has the right to come back within the year, because it's a difference in education models and everything else. It's very hard for a student and a teacher to adapt, because I haven't had that. You know, you get into a lot of problems. So for that reason, I'll always vote against them. But otherwise, I'd vote for them, because I just think we offer so much that the kid has to be really unhappy to leave. And if they are, they need to leave. They may be more successful. After all, our job is to meet the needs of the students.
Thank you.
My 2 cents.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Mr. Wilkerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, just so I'm understanding clearly, they had this information of what they needed to present in order to meet or exceed.
Yes, sir.
Okay, because I know when I went after my master's, I had a class and it gave me certain items I had to have in that class I had to complete. And if I didn't complete it, they didn't accept it. Most of what I've seen in this review, they didn't do a very good job of really wanting this school to be approved. when you look at everything is either, except for 4 items, I think, everything was either doesn't meet or it's partially meets. Because this is like a one-shot deal for us to come before us. I mean, I know we can reject it and they can come back. But if I want an A on my paper, I should be completing everything I need and have all the answers before I bring it to the instructor.
Yeah, but see, that's compared to us. We're above standards, and so they had no idea what they were getting into.
I understand. They should have done more research.
Mr. Wilkerson has the floor, please.
My other question, if I understood it right, is, so if this gets started and 6 months down the road, they don't have the funds to pay their teachers, we have to pick up the bill. Did I understand that right?
No, probably up to me to go on. Yes,
I think that there's a process. I'm not as familiar with the law about how deauthorizing a charter happens, but I would suspect that at that point, the state would probably dissolve the charter, and then those students would come back to us into their zone school, just like they would if they were students coming from anywhere into our system.
Okay. I may have just misunderstood that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkerson. Ms. Hawkins?
Help me understand the why of all of this. Do we have failing schools in Sumner County?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
And we can't answer that. We
can't?
don't
That
know.
doesn't matter?
Well,
Okay.
I mean, I'm saying that we can't answer why they applied. That would be
Okay.
something they would have to answer down the
So
road.
we don't have to know
Yeah,
why?
in the interview, we did ask that. I think that was the first question that Chairman Decker started out first with the questions, and we asked that. And Scott, do you remember kind of
Yeah.
paraphrase how they?
I think, yeah, y'all jump in. I believe what it was is they said that it was an area where there was a lot of growth and, what's that? And just giving more choice to parents,
Okay.
a classical academy choice.
Okay, so what is different about a charter school that we are not offering in our other schools?
We don't.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I would say that in the Hendersonville area, we're well represented, and across Sumner County. You know, the things that they specifically mentioned as differentiating what we do from what they do. Ms. Schreiner asked that question, and they weren't really able to offer much in terms of how they could differentiate from what we offer. The things that they highlighted were things like phonics.
We were a little bit perplexed that toward the end of the interview, Dr. Lee asked some fairly pointed questions. They didn't even know that we had a magnet school, that we had one based on a similar philosophy. And I think they even mentioned that they didn't do any research on Sumner County schools. They even know they had no idea how many AP courses we had, how many. They didn't do a lot of research and groundwork to kind of know what we had. So answering the question of how are you going to differentiate yourself and provide opportunities that we currently don't provide, it was non-existent because there was no answer. They didn't even know. They openly admitted that they had no clue.
In my limited knowledge of charter schools, and I acknowledge that there's more I need to learn about it, but just from my knowledge, it's my understanding that charter schools are intended to fill in a hole or a spot where students' needs are not being met. And so I think that would be a very important question to be answered is why are we doing this? I also was wanting to know, do students have to pay to go to a charter school?
No, ma'am.
No, okay, so it's not like a private school.
Right.
But our funds from our school system go to that charter school? That they follow the student?
What Ms. Brown said about in her question, about the funds following the student, that was 100% accurate. So when she mentioned that the dollars would go, that is 100% correct.
Okay.
If they chose to come back to us, and then how those funds come back with the student is still, because it's not transmitted daily, that would still be an issue. So like, I think probably what you were trying, maybe after I've thought about it, what you were asking is, well, when they leave and then they come back to us, then how does that work as far as not only the student coming back to us just from a curriculum standpoint and teacher and transition and all those kind of things, but also the funding side of it. And I really don't have, honestly, an accurate answer to that, because I don't think the state would do it by day. It would be a lag time in that transition from leaving to coming back. But I really don't know.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah.
what determines the qualifications for a student to go to a charter school? Do they have to prove that they are not having their needs met at the school where they are?
No, they would.
Okay.
There would be a process that we didn't see in the packet. It wasn't detailed, but there would be a process for students that wished to go to the school, that they would express that interest, and then they would be, I'm assuming, because they would have to follow public school law, that they would have to take everyone or everyone that applied until they met a threshold of enrollment. And that's a little bit of the concern that we had with the demographic, because if you take in large number and you say, okay, well, we're going to take students that are primarily zoned anywhere in the county that can get here, then your demographics reflect what our schools in that area or across the county reflect. And I think that was a little bit of concern. Another thing for us too that I think comes up from time to time in charter school discussion is, when you don't provide transportation, or possibly they will have to comply with the National School Lunch Act. But some of those things make a big difference if you have students that possibly struggle with transportation to school, but yet if they can't go, because if there's not transportation and busing, then they wouldn't be able to have access to the charter. Does that make sense? Or you just wouldn't have it. So there's some things like that are nuances that I think they didn't include in here, details of how they would do those things, but we still have some overall concerns about it.
It sounds very similar to Union Elementary and Merrill Hyde. Those are schools of choice. There are probably more people who apply than who get in. They're for students who are looking for something different from the school where they're zoned. That's just my thought.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hawkins. Ms. Andrews?
Okay, so I have a couple of questions, and as things have come up. Number one, can we please have this PowerPoint emailed to us?
Sure.
I feel like I will need to go back and forth, and it's got some great information
Absolutely.
on there. So if we can get that emailed to the board members, I feel like that would be very helpful as we kind of try to navigate through all of it. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but transportation, state law does not require us to provide transportation. So is that then they will also, that is part of their application, is that there will not be transportation provided?
They will not provide transportation. I believe they would have to provide if they had certain special students with disabilities, they would have to provide transport, but they would probably end up having to work that out with Norma's team.
How would they work that out, Ms. Stam, especially I'm thinking of, with specifically, our wheelchair bound students and so forth. That, I mean, it's one thing for certain special needs children, you can put them in very easily accessible vehicles, but other students such as wheelchair bound students, that's
I think they alluded to making those arrangements, and I'm making an assumption they would do that by contracting with a transportation agency, or they could even pay the parents.
mileage. That might be a way they could accommodate that. I don't think we're talking about our buses taking them there.
Okay.
And they do say they would, follow all accessibility rules about the building, that it would be ADA
Compliant.
accessible.
So if they were though to contract with a transportation company or so forth, we take pride in who we allow around our children and so forth and do background checks. Would that be something that then they would have to abide by as well as whoever, even if they contract out to a
Yeah, that
transportation
they would
company?
take on that responsibility.
They would have to do that.
We would require,
State law requires.
State law, okay. Just want to make sure all of our children are protected. You talked about that they would have to follow lunch, breakfast rules.
I think when you go and look through the entire packet, you'll see in that section, team members, correct me if I'm wrong, committee members, but they referenced that in other locations, they outsource that function. And so there's not a lot of details, we're not real sure, and they didn't answer in the interview much beyond that. I think in that section gave them maybe possibly meet standard, is that right? I can't remember. The reason I think we were leaning that way,
Partially.
some of the rules around, obviously the breakfast and lunch are National School Lunch Act. So if you get reimbursement, which they would be seeking reimbursement, then you have to comply with the rules. So, it would be less us making sure that compliance was occurring and how we're audited about our school lunch program. They would have to go through that as well.
Okay. Sounds like a lot of outsourcing, which is concerning, but this is a hypothetical question because I like hypothetical questions. That's how my brain works. So hypothetically it opens and there are students that attend. Hypothetically, they're none of our currently public school students. They are, say, homeschool students or current private school students or so forth that go. What does that look like then from a local funding standpoint as far as, I know, we are calculated on our students on enrolled. So I'm understanding that they would then be considered Sumner County School students. That would then also increase the local funding as well, correct? I know that would probably be no different than if those students did end up coming to our current brick and mortar schools.
Yeah, so I guess the way to look at that would be that total funding amount would transfer with that student. So it would be the same as if they were in our student headcount, but yet we forward that money to a separate organization that runs that school and manages that school. The same thing would be, the same thing from a management standpoint would be who, if there were an issue at that school, right, we wouldn't answer for that. We wouldn't sort out what the problem is, or we wouldn't sort out what happened in the classroom. Does that make sense?
No.
That would be, that would totally be the charter school board and the group that they hire to run their schools. So you've got Delray they would have a board that, I think they were trying to say that, that Brentwood and a couple other places were local, because that's where I think their board members were from, basically. But, it wouldn't come back for with us.
So if there is an issue within the school and they go to their principal and they are not satisfied with that, as a board member, that is then not something,
No.
even though they're considered Sumner County students and they are Sumner County tax dollars,
Never comes to us.
we would then say, I'm sorry,
Nope.
this is not something that we discussed. You'll need to go to your board of directors.
That's right.
And-
Of the charter school.
Of the
board of directors.
right.
And I think, Ms. Anderson, when you read the file, I think
that's
Dr.
clear
Yon
in there.
identified, his team, the operations team identified that one of the concerns is they have in their governance a process for parents to, they mention a process for parents to file a grievance, but it's not spelled out. So what do you do if you disagree with the classroom decision? Because as Dr. Phillips said, we have no decision-making authority once they enter into the charter school.
And their principal is, I mean, so like right now, if there's an issue with the principal and so forth, we know we can come to you and say, hey, Dr. Phillips, we need you to look at this. So how,
We don't have anything to do with it.
so again, that's.
No, we don't have anything to do with it. We're not answering a call. We're not, because they're Sumner County students only for the funding that will go with the child to the charter.
Okay.
But we don't have anything to do with the management or the organization of the charter. That's our role now on the front end, is to say, do you think that application meets the standard that all of you would feel good about opening a new school in Sumner County?
And I think that's, with this being the first time that we,
Yeah.
you know, it's a large
kinda hard to
thing
get
to
your
get my
mind
mind
around.
around. And
Yeah,
that's, you know,
Yeah, it
I
was
have
for us too.
and I
We've-
talk through
we've
things
had
to
the-
get my mind around them. So
We've had the advantage of reading through this document multiple times and having a bunch of conversations and committee meetings and that kind of thing. So, and that's one of the reasons we wanted to make sure you had all of the information. Once you read through it and you kind of see, okay, well, here's who they're proposing will be their board members. So if there is a concern from a parent, we don't know the process the parent would use, but we do know they say it would go to this board, and those folks are not from Sumner County. They don't live here now. But that would be who they would file their complaint with.
is there a guarantee that they would live here once the charter opened?
No, oh, absolutely not. They don't live.
So
in-
that it would even possibly be somebody they're contacting out of state in regards to a
It will-
issue that they would have.
It will be
within
out of state. The superintendent of their school district will be in Texas.
Okay. What is the proposed, and again, I haven't looked through it, so I'm just, what is the proposed grade level bands that they are asking for? Is it
K-8.
K-12 or?
K-8 to start with.
It's-
K-8 to start, eventually K-12.
Okay. What about athletics? That is, I mean, huge, obviously within Sumner County and so forth, and because,
Well, they don't have a space, and they don't have fields.
right,
So it's hard for us to kind of, and they couldn't answer. They couldn't even answer the PE question about where will kids play during the day? Do they have a playground? Are you gonna have, because the unknown of where the facility will be, you really can't answer any of that stuff. So, you
and
know,
per state law, our students are required certain amounts
yeah,
per
we
day
mentioned
about.
that. We mentioned that, and they said something about movement in a cafetorium type gym activity, big open space, but it just really wasn't a lot of detail around it. Now the athletic question, they kind of, I think if I remember correctly, said they haven't even thought about it. I think they felt like I think they used the word several times, partner with the district, and then I think Katie Brown said, when you say district, are you referencing us, meaning the school district? And they said yes. And so we had several things throughout the interview of 95 minutes or so where they referenced athletics was one of them. Well, we might be looking to partner with the district, but I mean, we don't have any obligation
Okay.
to do that. But maybe they have that arrangement in other locations.
Okay. Last question is, we're talking about location and so forth. Can you give me I'm visual, but I'm not great when it comes to geometry. So can you give me a visual of what an equivalent 85,000 square foot building is?
Yeah, Burris Elementary,
Is currently, okay, so,
about 92,000 square feet. Most of our middle schools, our newer elementary schools are always hovering right around 90, 92, 94,000 square feet. And we're looking at that in a ratio run to have core capacity in the 850 range. So, if they're trying to stick to a standard that's probably pretty fact-based for a K-8 student, high school students need more square footage per student. They're bigger,
right.
than a kindergartner.
I'm just trying to
it's a little
think of,
different. So it's 80,
I'm
85.
building
yeah.
that size.
Yeah.
I mean,
So in your mind, you kind of think about, you would have that.
Where-
Our middle schools range, because we have some older buildings that have been renovated and changed to middle school. But new middle schools are going to be 130,000 square feet.
I mean, I think I'm just thinking of like space. Well, I mean, there's lots of conversations that have happened in, over the several years as far as building availability within our area and where that type of space would be located and so forth. And then just thinking of that in essence of children being in those types of locations and safety and so forth. And then also, are there specific zoning changes and so forth that would need to happen if they were to get, I mean, obviously this county owns the land that Burris is on and Knoxos and so forth. I don't know where they're necessarily looking, but if it was, say, I don't know. Somebody mentioned the new Music City place. That's an industrial area. They were looking at putting a school in an industrial area. Does there have to be zoning changes in order for that to happen?
Yeah,
It has to be approved,
Yeah, there have
correct?
to be zoning changes that would go through the process and be approved. And then, of course, we have different rules we go by for state fire marshal and life safety than most places. So, that process, as Scott mentioned, that process is somewhat, it's not easy even if you do it quite often.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
Mr.
And then
Duncan
also
knows
just
this
thinking
from his,
about
from his, from his work every day. It is for us a little bit because we've gone through it enough times in the process, but there's still a lot that has to be done. And so even if you had just think about how long we've been planning for Liberty Creek, and even with the resources of people and team that we have. So it is a pretty heavy lift, certainly if you don't have a location already kind of mapped out in there. It's would be a pretty heavy lift to be able by August of 24 to have school.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Andrews. Mr. Gregory.
How many different alternate learning environments do we have in Sumner County schools now? I see one back here.
Well, actually, Ms. Schreiner represents two. I was thinking as we were talking, you've got Merrill Hyde, Union, okay, but then you also have E.B. Wilson, Middle College Tech, Middle College, Sumner County, Vol State. So 5 or 6.
And TCAD,
And yes, the Middle College Portland. Yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. So 5 or 6.
They're open to for the entire county, everyone.
Yes, sir. The entire county can apply. Yes, sir.
Right. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory. Mr. Daniels?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just got a couple questions, kind of following up on what Ms. Andrews was asking. First, has this charter school organization, I know they've got a number of schools in Texas and I think in Arkansas based on what I read, is this their first in Tennessee?
So we've got two things happening here. The actual group that applied, made application to us, they don't operate charter schools anywhere.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the first charter school application they've ever submitted in any state. Now, the CMO group that they're proposing to run the school, if it's approved, the CMO group is Responsive Ed. That's the group that has multiple charter schools in several states. They were on our interview call as well. So you kind of have a two-tier approach.
So they want to open the school, but they're not actually going to operate it?
That's correct. Yeah, they are the board that makes application and opens the school, and then the CMO group will hire the principals and teachers, make payroll, handle day-to-day complaints, and then if a parent or someone didn't like a ruling or what happened or something happened at school, if they couldn't handle it, I suspect, like Scott mentioned, you would eventually get to their board, but none of those folks are, are here. None of them are.
Is that how they've opened the other charter schools, where this group that we're talking about goes out and puts the application together, and then once accepted, they step out of the way? Is that what I'm hearing, or
I'm
is
sure
it just
that,
in this case?
I don't think so. I'm sure that there's probably a mix of the two.
Okay.
So I really couldn't answer that. I really couldn't answer that to be
Okay.
100% correct.
Gotcha.
Probably a mix of the two, Andy.
Gotcha. I know Ms. Andrews and I think Ms. Brown had asked about the funding. So the dollars follow the student, and everything else is covered by that other organization that's not making the application but is going to manage the thing. All right, I got that. But as far as the dollars that go with them, is it just who sets that dollar? I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, we've got the dollars that come to us, but then on top of that, when we do our budget every year, for the last couple of years, we've covered school fees. There are other costs and other things that we provide to the schools and to the teachers. Does that, if we make that decision as a board here, does that apply to them as well? So it's just the dollars allocated per student by the state, so that dollar amount.
So there's a calculation the state would do based on your budget, and they would say, well, that equates to, minus capital and X, that equates to X per student.
Gotcha.
And then you under our current formula, you would send those dollars in the required payment method to them. And then they would be in charge of how that occurs. So like our teacher salary scale would have nothing to do with them. So they could pay all of their teachers the same. They could pay them more or less, you more than you. We don't have any control of that. We don't have any control of their policies about how they handle anything. I mean, it would just be basically we would give them funds, and then they would be responsible for everything beyond that. So they would make decisions at their board level about whether they wanted to buy school supplies or not, or whether they wanted to, whatever they wanted to do.
School uniforms, they could.
Whatever
Okay.
they wanted to do. It would not be a decision that would come back through us.
So
And Mr. Daniels, they specifically, I think Ms. Brown asked a lot of questions about specific budget line items, and they couldn't give a detailed or specific answer about what they were going to do with uniforms or school supplies or many of the things that I think our kids in Sumner County expect.
But they'd be responsible for all of that
Yeah,
outside of
all
us.
of that.
So, like I said, or I think Ms. Andrews asked about, or you'd mentioned about the nutrition. If they have, economically challenged students free lunch, they'd have to provide that. But do they? I guess all their employees, their nutrition staff, they hire, they set their lunch prices.
And this is an assumption again. We have to make a lot of assumptions because there's not enough detail in the section to answer the question. And then when we ask those kinds of questions in the interview, we still didn't get a lot of detail. We probably got a little bit more ambiguity and vagueness than anything. But anyway, that's just my opinion, not everybody. Long story short, yes, they would be in charge of that. I would assume, Andy, that I would assume they would outsource that.
Okay.
So they would have someone that's a vendor that brings food to the school every day, because they would not probably want the front-end capital cost on a renovation to actually build a kitchen that would require, that would
Significant
be,
staffing,
would,
yeah.
would be a standard that would pass inspection to do school breakfast and lunch every day. So now they may eventually, if they were approved in 10 years from now, successful and built a campus somewhere or something like that. But from everything that they mentioned to us, it would be more outsourcing to a vendor, and then they would bring food to school every day.
So, other staff, counselors, nurses, SRO officers,
We
they're
didn't really,
responsible for
yeah,
all.
we didn't see any evidence, we didn't see any evidence in the financials, where they were allocating appropriate dollars for counselors, school nurses. They did mention, I think in the interview, Lisa, about a school nurse and nursing services. I think that came up in Lisa and also in Norma. But Amanda and I couldn't find where the revenue stream against the expenditures, we couldn't figure out really, and they didn't clarify for us in the interview, really, how that was gonna happen.
So
Typically with nurses, I asked them where that was budgeted, and they said they held the budget.
Although they said they were gonna provide them.
Yeah.
So.
I noticed that in the application, one of the comments said that, their vision holds that our traditional liberal education is the surest foundation for individual flourishing and leads through a robust yet civil conversation about our well-being to civic freedom, justice, and happiness for all. I would assume that their curriculum, books in their library would have to meet whatever state standards are. I know there's a lot of laws being discussed right now.
So, Scott, you wanna take that one?
Yeah, they would have to follow, they're a public school, so they have to follow all state laws governing that. In terms of their curriculum decisions are fine. I don't believe, they mentioned they were gonna buy curriculum for the entire school for $300,000, which is not gonna happen. Yeah. But right, they didn't fund it properly. Their curriculum choices, Singapore math, the phonics that they're using, things like that, those are valid curricular choices. There's nothing wrong with those. They would meet standards in Tennessee. The concern that we had was not so much the curriculum choices, it's that they couldn't, everything that they do from their assessments to everything else is connected to Texas or Arkansas state standards. So when we asked specifically about Tennessee standards, they said it would take a couple years to get those mapped over. So that was a real concern of ours is, that you got to have it mapped to Tennessee standards because otherwise you're assessing on things that they're not going to be assessed on in Tennessee.
Well, in mentioning standards, I do find that interesting because, when you look at some of the comments and some of the questions, they talk about, locating our campus in a high growth location. To me, that says it's a high income location based on where they're locating and what they're trying to do. Accessible to a broad range of Sumner County families. They've got, a breakdown of our student success rates. They've got our enrollment numbers. They've got, the housing growth or median price growth in both Gallatin and Hendersonville, the demographic breakdown, which is interesting because those demographics don't really fit the Hendersonville market as much. But I find it interesting that they've got all this information, yet they didn't do research on our schools and didn't know we had a magnet school. And it's not just, there are magnet schools all over the country, but we're not just talking about a magnet school. We're talking about one of the top magnet schools in the entire country. I don't know how you could just not know that that's in the area that you want to open up a school. But the only other thing I'll mention is just that, when you talked about the numbers of, they anticipated demographics of 11% disadvantaged, 2% disabilities, 1% English learners, and you look at their total for K-12 projection of around 1,000 students. So you're talking about, 10 English language learners. If that's 1%, you're talking about maybe 20 students with disabilities. Maybe 100 that are economically disadvantaged. And I look at our Hendersonville schools and what we offer, and I just don't see, especially in that market, how it's a fit and provides any value to our students in those areas. Now, if it was located in the northern part of the community, I know we hear sometimes conversation about they wish they had a classical school or they wish they had a magnet school just because of transportation. And I think that's a big thing. There are students in that part of the county that can't get to Hendersonville, even if they, were able to get in based on their scores and their acceptance. But it just seems to me like it's just a bunch of numbers they threw together to try to come into an area that's growing really quickly, and they want a part of that money. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm gonna, if I can articulate what's been running around in my mind for the last, last hour. I'm gonna come at this a little different angle. All the way from Miss Tammy to Mr. Wilkinson, the majority of the voters in your district trusted you enough to elect you to come down here and represent them in Gallatin once a month. I don't believe I'll find 5 people in White House, if they know what we've just heard, that would support this board deciding to approve this application. I think we need to think about that. We represent those people. They put us here and trusted us to represent them. Think about the people in your district. How many can you pick that would say, I want my child to go to this school that doesn't have an SRO, most likely, has maybe one school nurse, is going to pick and choose the students with special needs that they allow in the building, most likely. They're going to pick and choose the students, the regular ed students that they allow in their building. If they can play football, they're the front of the line. I don't know that that's a fact, but I wanted to say it anyway. Now, I know local dollars, tax dollars, help to support our school system. And the people who approve the spending of the local tax dollars, and I think I'm going to have this in the form of a question. The people who represent the citizens of this county have zero authority or right or privilege to confront or to suggest to this charter school. Is that correct?
There's a little bit, like the school board as authorizer would have to come back and do periodic reviews of the charter.
But periodic, not meaning on a day-to-day
Yes, sir.
basis.
That would be
Okay.
like, I think every 2 years or something.
So
The
if
point I think is, local tax dollars would go through us to them. But
yeah,
then the citizens that are the taxpayers would really have no way to influence the expenditure of those dollars.
precisely my point. Thank you for stating it that way. So, in essence, if we voted to approve this application, then what we're telling the folks that we represent is, we're going to let them take your money and do as you wish with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. Mrs. Hawkins?
Just 2 quick follow-up questions. The organization that has submitted this charter and the organization that they will be handing off to, I understand they're 2 different, like one's applying and they're gonna have someone else run it. Are they nonprofit or profit organizations?
Nonprofit.
They're both nonprofit. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And then my second question is, if we determine as a board that the application does not meet our standards, certain areas such as the building or whether or not they have a nurse or SRO, and as it shows, each one of those categories had significantly situations where they did not meet our standards. If this passes through our hands and passes through our hands again, and then it's a matter of the state deciding, can the state approve something that does not meet our standards?
Yes, ma'am.
Under the current law.
Thank you, Ms. Hawkins. Mr. Duncan?
I'm still letting that one digest. The state could do that. Okay. This may not be a question that you can answer, but it seems like this application has got a layered system of an owner, manager, consultants, food service people, all this conglomerate of a charter school. If there is a legal action against that school, is the school system of Sumner County liable in any way?
No. They have to carry their own insurance and provide their own.
Will they have to provide their own legal
Yes.
defense?
Yes, it wouldn't be us.
Because I understand we've experienced a number of those. You have to be very careful with your students and how you handle those situations.
Yeah, that would fall back on them, but there's some rules, that are there with the state that if at some point they were approved, they would be required to defend themselves and it wouldn't be on us.
So with them being a nonprofit, they're not a limited liability corporation or anything like that, where they would be limiting their liability, where it doesn't matter if they get sued because they can only be sued for an X amount of dollars. Is that kind of what their structure is?
That's a technical legal question. I think that they would still fall under the tort claims law because they are considered a public school. So I think that would extend to them. So there would be some, just like we have, there would be some protections to them in regard to class action suits and things that would come forward from a major catastrophe.
I just want to make sure that the students that attend a facility like this will have some legal standing if anything ever was to
The
happen.
law would say that they have the same legal standing as other public school students.
Okay. One sidebar question. The teachers that are hired for this charter school would not be Sumner County employees. They'd be independent. They'd be just
That's
employees
correct.
of that charter school.
That's right.
So with that being said, would they still participate in the retirement plan under the state?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they would have to comply with, state retirement, just like every other public school.
Okay. One more, Mr. Chairman, I'll be done. They're held to the same standards we are. So does that mean they have, the state has the authority over them like they do us? If we don't meet the standards, there's certain precautions and certain steps we have to take in the following years if we don't meet the standards for certain things.
That's correct. It's my
Yeah,
understanding.
Yeah, that's where the biggest amount of oversight from the district comes, is if they fail to meet the academic standards. That's one of the big responsibilities of the school board as authorizer, is to, that's probably our primary source of accountability, is if they fail to meet, then eventually we have to take the action to revoke the charter.
Is that our only recourse? Recourse is to because it seems like we're so hands off and they're so independent. If they're not meeting the standards, it seems like that's the only recourse that we would have, is to, because we can't go in and fix it because it's not ours to fix.
Yeah. So, yes and yes.
It just gets complicated the more we kind of look
If you
at it.
deauthorize a charter school, there's a very specific process in law that you have to follow to do that, and it spells out. I've not really read that law many times because it wasn't relevant to me, but if we get to that point down the road, then it will be probably very explicit in the law about what we have to do as the authorizer to say, hey, you haven't met these standards. And you haven't remedied those concerns, and so we're going to revoke your charter.
It just seems odd to me that we have that level of power, but yet we lose total control. I don't know, it's still got to sink in, like I said, this whole
That's
thing.
right.
Scott, would you please share with the committee members that aren't here tonight how much we appreciate all the work that went into this?
Yeah.
It seems very thoroughly done, and we can't thank you enough for doing that.
I mean, it really was, they've done a tremendous amount of work, and I
Agreed.
appreciate each one of
Agreed.
them.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time.
And Ms. Hayes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Brewer. This is a lot to digest, and we'll be doing a lot of reading. And I appreciate the hours that have been spent in going through this application. So remind me, the Delray Education School, this is their first school
Yes, ma'am.
in the state of Tennessee, or their first school ever?
Anywhere.
Ever, yeah.
Okay, so there's not a pass to see what the success rate is on this. But with Responsive Ed, they've been doing this in charter schools across the nation, this group, Responsive.
Southeast.
They've got Texas.
What is their percent? What's their success or not success
Well,
percentage?
Ms. Hayes, they referenced that they're successful, but they did not give us specific data to for us to verify that success.
Okay, just said they were successful.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
We need data. The test scores of the students, if they don't meet the standards, it's sometimes a little too late to do the right thing. When are you advised that they're not meeting the standards, and does that reflect in our pool of test scores to the state if they are a public school under our umbrella, which we don't have much governance, it sounds like. But does that go into a pool, their test scores with our great test scores?
That's a great question, Ms. Hayes.
I don't want them bring us down.
I think they're separated.
I think so.
Okay.
We would see that when it's publicly reported, just like we
Our school.
would Wilson County or
Okay.
anybody else. So there may be a mechanism, I don't know, there may be a mechanism where they have to share that with
Yeah.
the local board or us prior to it being publicly released. I just don't know. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
We
There's a
can
lot
find
of
out.
unknowns.
But I do not think it would be a part of our scores, like everyone
Right.
looks at our scores, and it would not include those. But
Okay.
we can make sure. I would think it's a separate,
Yeah, I can
a
find that
separate
out.
line.
Well, I don't know how financially sound they are, but one of my questions was the liability. I think about it all the time. Are they gonna, if something happens at that school, you know, most of the time when a lawsuit's filed, they come after whoever's got the money. So I don't know how financially sound this group is. When that happens, it's not a matter of if, it's when that happens, that we absolutely would not be the body that they would come to in a lawsuit. Is that what we know, that we know?
I'm going to defer that one to Dr. Phillips.
Yeah, it would not come to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the red flags, and I'm going to be reading a lot, they only say that they provide, and it was a concern and a question of this committee, that they only provide minimal technology. So,
Yes, ma'am. In the interview, when we asked about that, they said that it's part of their classical approach that they don't integrate much technology.
okay. Merrill Hyde Magnet has a lot of that going on, right?
Yes, ma'am. Merrill Hyde is
They got it
sufficiently-
going on.
Yes. Mhm.
And all of our schools.
Yes, ma'am.
Union and so classical, that makes no sense to me. Okay, so this is the first, Delray is the first, this is the first time they would open a school. Well, I appreciate the due diligence that has gone on to this point, but there are a lot of vague unknowns here. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Bachman?
I think, thank you. I think Ms. Hayes asked the questions that I was concerned about, was accountability and background information about the organization that will be hiring and doing the, taking care of these schools. I think we need more information about that, if they would be forthcoming with that. Because I think that's important. We need to know their success rate, their liabilities, what their problems might have been, how many have had their charters pulled. So just a little bit.
Thank you.
One thing I want to know, excuse me, the state test scores, when do they come back to the schools?
Ms. Brown, it's
We try to figure it out every year.
Well, the reason I'm asking is there any danger of their scores coming back in time for them to dump their bad ones out on us?
no, ma'am.
There's
We
no
usually
danger.
the last couple of years it's been somewhere like July, August.
Oh, well, so they're still behind. All right. And the other thing is, Tammy, I think you ought to relax. The greatest part of this whole thing to me is somebody has done all my homework for me. I don't have to do a thing. Y'all got it all listed, given all the reasons. They don't meet the criteria. So I'll wait on what they come back with. And I appreciate it. I'm not gonna spend my time on it when you've done it for me. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Well, any other questions? Any other statements from you? Okay, looks like we're all done. That's all that's on the agenda, so we're adjourned.